Hello class and welcome to the presentation of my capstone proposal. This proposal is an implementation plan of changes to one of HRC's main management systems. And I will talk a little bit more about this system in a bit. We don't have a whole lot of time, so I'll just get into the next slide. Here is the agenda for this presentation. We will cover briefly the inputs and outputs of the proposal, the planning of it, what I hope to achieve, of course, budget, and planning for the implementation project itself. To the right here, I'd like to share HRC's vision with everyone because it really embodies the overall goal of this proposal, which is taking care of our soldiers. And next is the scope of the proposal or the issue at hand. So the problem is that personal information of soldiers and family members is too easily accessible and frankly an oversight of the command. But to be clear, this is not an issue with firewall protection from outside threats, but more so to ensure that the individuals who are accessing the information housed in the system have a need to know and is only allowed to access functions that is really pertinent to their everyday duties. For example, an individual with SMS access that works in the awards department can access a service member's banking information. There is no real need for this. So rather than focusing on outsider threats, I'm simply bringing more attention to protecting soldiers against insider threats. So a little more information about SMS. It is used throughout the organization, not all departments, but most departments do. It allows us to manage many different HR functions for service members, such as manage their records, awards, retirements, and duty assignments. Again, the intent is to increase restrictions or the security clearance level required to access certain information within each branch. The loopholes in the current system directly affect service members and military families. Also, in the instance that an individual's information is shared and results in damage to that individual, or if operational details fall into the wrong hands, HRC will be liable for this damage caused in either situation. So these changes would benefit soldiers, military families, and HRC as a whole. So moving on to goals and objectives, there are 4 broad goals to accomplish before I can deem this as a success. Research of the current accessibility levels and functions, identifying who or which departments are needed to accomplish objectives, such as finance. We would need security managers' input and also different departments' leadership. Next is to gain approval and then begin implementation of changes. This table here outlines the key deliverables and timeframes for completing each sub-goal. So before we can start execution, I must first ensure data is gathered, and analyzed to ensure personnel will have the appropriate access to SMS, and also to develop the project plan. So once approved, the implementation phase can begin. So what are the costs associated with the project? The table here covers the cost of the entire project, which means the implementation of changes for all HRC personnel. But because that includes thousands, the project itself will be phased, and therefore project costs are also listed per phase. So cost for the first phase is listed here in the second column, and the phases for the remaining branches are also listed separately. This is important to budget so that once the first phase is complete, it'll be easier to identify where, or if at all, costs should be adjusted. I also want to mention here that costs will be covered by HRC, so no out-of-pocket costs for personnel who require security clearance increases or for the surveys. This is why the approval process is so extensive because it must be approved by our SJA or our legal department, and also the finance chief must also concur prior to the plan going up to the HRC chief of staff for final approval. And that is because we must ensure that all costs are within HRC's budget. And we also have overtime costs that are included, and that will cover the IT department's time for implementing the changes that needs to be done. These changes will happen after normal duty hours as to not disrupt system access during the day. And besides the 100% return on investment, there are significant non-monetary values that I'd like to mention. So with increasing security clearances for select individuals, HRC is actually investing in its personnel, which in turn can reduce turnover. Changes will also minimize the insider threat that I mentioned previously, and also minimize future issues with security. And next here we have the project documents. These documents were developed during the planning phase, but will be updated throughout the course of the project. The project charter is a document that will be submitted for approval along with the proposal. It essentially lays out and explains the existence of the project or the reasons for it. And then we have the risk register, which is an excellent project management tool used to identify, describe, and really rank the risk of the project. Because this is done early on, I will revisit this document throughout planning, at the start of implementation, and throughout. What's important about the register is the value it holds for stakeholders, specifically the risk responses listed here. To have a plan in place to either mitigate or assume certain risk is extremely beneficial and really wise in regards to proper project planning. These documents will also be available to stakeholders, as will the updates made to them, in efforts to really just keep everyone abreast as changes occur. And with that, let's jump to actual project planning. So the first method used in planning the implementation project is the critical path method. This means tasks and objectives are dependent on the completion of other tasks. For example, surveying must be completed and analyzed before decisions on access levels or SMS functions can be made. So evident from previous slides, all focal points has been touched on in the planning process in which the project documents were developed, all while really keeping the scope of the project in mind. So in order to develop the final implementation plan or the project plan, the scope was applied, identified where resources are needed, and with that was able to prioritize the project task in order to put the plan in motion. All right, so for the actual implementation for phase 1, we have here the path to completion. And you'll notice in each objective, each one has a specific owner other than the project manager. So once the budget is approved, it starts off with the finance department ensuring that the survey program is purchased and the overtime funding has been allocated. I will work with the department managers of the phase 1 branch to really push out that survey and then to analyze the findings. We then provide IT with the data that we've developed so that IT can develop their own plan to meet the requirements of the project within the given time frame. At that same time, security is initiating the processes of security clearances. And communication is absolutely critical over these months because a lapse in communication could really cost us tremendously. It is also vital that after implementation is complete, that we sit and we review the first phase before planning really gets underway for the upcoming phases of the project. if there is an issue in budget or timelines, if there were pushback from personnel or any significant changes to the number of personnel in each department, these factors will really need to be considered in the planning of the future phases to ensure a smoother process. And class, that concludes my presentation. If anything, I want you to take away how passionate I am about our soldiers and ensuring their information is protected or does not fall into the wrong hands. Please feel free to provide feedback, or if you have any questions, I'll be happy to expand on any of this information. Thank you so much for watching.